Many of the issues in the country have been linked to conflict minerals. Some neighboring countries, Western countries, and corporations have been implicated in various unthinkable forms of human rights violations in the DRC. In 2005, the International Court of Justice ordered Uganda to pay reparations to the Democratic Republic of Congo for the five-year occupation of its eastern regions. In 2010, the United Nations Mapping Report documented over 600 incidents of serious violations of international human rights and humanitarian abuses committed in the Democratic Republic of Congo between 1993 and June 2003. It is what to note here that they were not just murders. Murders of 2 or 3 were not accounted for in the report. They were the most severe cases, some of which involved mass graves, entire villages murdered, and more. It was the United Nations submission that the abuses qualified as crimes against humanity. Hope soared after a long and costly civil war was brought to an end in 2003, but the nation had instead seen sporadic waves of fighting, especially in the eastern parts of the country. According to the United Nations Refugee Agency, over 918,000 Democratic Republic of Congo refugees and asylum seekers have been hosted in African countries. 5.1 million people displaced inside the DRC between October 2007 and September 2019. These and many more issues have inspired the campaign #CongoIsBleeding in a bid to get Congolese voices heard and drive the cause of justice. For many people, this is the first time they are really learning about the issues in Congo beyond the conflict and poverty. We want to explore how Africans and indeed the rest of the world have managed to move on while so much injustice and violations happen in the heart of the continent, in a country that supplies the world with otherwise scarce resources. I'm joined with 2 gentlemen joining us today, one in Lagos and the other in New York. I have Melandu Badila, popularly known as Young Paris. He's an international Congolese artist who has been using his platform to draw attention to the issues in Congo, especially the adverse effects of unregulated and unethical trade in cobalt by big corporations. Welcome, Young Paris. And I also have Professor Chris Emafidon, who is a multiple world record holder and world-renowned advisor to presidents, royalty, government, and corporate leaders. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you very much for your invitation.
Now let's get straight to the matter. Gentlemen, we've been hearing a lot about issues in the Congo for quite a time, from conversations with people, and I see that some are just beginning to understand the nuance and the fact that about all we have been benefiting from the Congo in one way or the other. Everyone that has a laptop or a cell phone has benefited from what's going on in the Congo one way or the other. We're kind of complicit. So I would like to start with you, Professor. What is really going on in Congo, and why is the Congo bleeding?
It is very sad that they say you don't bite the finger that feeds you. The soil and the ground that is feeding the tech revolution is being beaten by the tech company. And what I would want us to know is that if we bite the finger that feeds us today, that tomorrow we may not be able to see any other food. So the world has gone too far in this technology that we can't do without it. So every single company that benefits directly or indirectly from the produce, be it raw or refined, it doesn't matter, must make an investment in every single child out of that place. Every single child in that area must not be left destitute, because it's a blessing to have something under the ground. So there should be an educational social corporate responsibility take it now or leave it. If not, we will need to start a serious campaign. Not just Congo is bleeding for a few days or a few weeks. No, it'll be forever until we understand we can't do what we did with oil, because that's what's happening in oil-producing countries, setting up wars against each other. That's what happened with gold. We can't do that. It's too late.
Now, let me bring in young Paris. You're Congolese, and the issues in the Congo are very dear to your heart. A lot of people say, you know, we could go back as far as to the time of King Leopold and to the, you know, Belgian Congo. We could also look at the dictatorship under Mobutu Sese Seko. What do you think is driving? What's the immediate cause of this conflict that we're seeing in the Congo today?
Well, I mean, it's. I think, you know, we need to understand the source of why, you know, Congo is being marginalized in this capacity. You have to recognize that most issues that Congolese face as a nationality go back to mining. So I feel like essentially, just to kind of even piggyback off of our brother's point, is this needs to be reformed, because essentially, when there's only a domestic presence and a domestic government to manage Congo, you see why it's been able to be, you know, the divide just doesn't even add up. There should be no capacity where we have 24 trillion in natural untapped minerals and we're the poorest country on the planet. It doesn't add up. So I feel like what we're trying to do now, and I speak on behalf of the Free Congo movement, which is in line with Congo's bleeding, is to organize. I think right now the youth and the young generation and the millennials it's up to us now, and it's our responsibility to change Africa and to shift the conversation. But it does stem back to this international presence that puts pressure on these companies to have a moral responsibility to give back. I think, you know, what I loved about the Black Lives Matter movement and some of the goals they have achieved was they were able to put pressure on the companies to say, you benefit off of Black lives and you to give back to the Black community. And I think it's that same reform when we look at Congo. We give, and we don't receive. And that's the issue of business and reform. So we need to really investigate and get into the business accusations, business structure that is how Congo is being managed, because in the end, it's all business. It's all bad business. It stems back to the business.
Now, my question is to Professor. Mention global international interest in what is going on in the conflict in the Congo. It should actually be of global interest. But on the other hand, when you look at what is going on, the United Nations mission in the Congo, MONUSCO, has been 21 years. That's a long time. And for the United Nations to deploy a peacekeeping mission, it means it's of global interest. So 21 consecutive years of United Nations peacekeeping forces in the Congo. Why hasn't it stopped the bleeding? Why hasn't it changed really anything, especially in terms of security?
Because the people have not had a voice in the discussion. And that is why I'm so hopeful. Because now we are living in a brand new world where everybody has a voice. Before George Floyd, you could have a voice. But now we are living in the hashtag generation, where anyone that has access to the mobile phone or mobile technology can put something out there. So it's no longer locked up in the boardrooms. It's no longer locked up in the conferences for the elite. We, ordinary people, can now participate in a global discussion that you could not think of 20 years ago. You can have something happening right now in Lusaka, and in the same time happening in Los Angeles, in the same time happening in Lagos. That was not possible in the era of my parents or grandparents. So there's been a democratization of access to information, access to misinformation, and access to a global discussion. This is the reason why I don't look at the past and think it's tragic. I look forward to say we have a better day. There is nobody right now on the continent of Africa that does not have facility to be able to broadcast. 20 years ago, you didn't. Like I said, this is no longer a mobile phone. It is a computing device that is powerful enough to put a man on the moon. The power of the entire computer that put Apollo 11 on the moon is so small that this computer is 7 million times more powerful than it. So we have empowered a generation. And when you get home, I want you to talk to a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, or a 5-year-old, and they will tell you exactly what is happening. Because of what is happening to the whole world, we can see that you cannot sit down and exclude the populace. You've got to include the populace because of the mass mobilization that has made easy thanks to social media, thanks to mobile technology, thanks to broadband availability. So it's a radically different world that we're living in. And we've got to wake up and realize this and recalibrate what we did before and recalculate. If not, history will judge us unfairly. And that's what you need to know.
Now, young Paris, just a few years ago, there was hope for, it was the first democratic handover in the history of the Congo when former President Joseph Kabila handed over to the current president, Etienne Tshisekedi, and a lot of people thought, you know, it's going to bring about renewed hope to stop the violence in the Congo. Has that handover from Joseph Kabila to Etienne Tshisekedi, has it changed things on ground, especially in the eastern part of the DRC? And also to add to that, the presence of MONUSCO, 21 years. What are the feelers you're getting from people on the ground in the Congo?
I mean, you have to understand, when there's a consecutive agenda, things don't really change. You know, the companies, if you look at a Coca-Cola or McDonald's, they have a structure and they stay to the structure and they switch out presidents or CEOs. So the idea here is really reform. And I think we shouldn't even be focusing as African people on the politicians or even these presidents. I think we need to focus on the companies that are in our backyard. So when we look at the mining giants like Glencore, like Gécamines, you know, these are the guys who are doing business in our land. So we need to figure out how and investigate how these business acquisitions are being managed and regulated. Because essentially, even if you try to target the Teslas or the Apples or the Samsungs, you know, as these tech giants, the initial reaction is we can't regulate how mining industry companies are managing their business, because, you know, we're fighting against child cobalt mining. My biggest issue here is that there are 40,000 children illegally mining in Congo, and this is a complete human rights violation. But essentially, we do need to look at the companies in place that are allowing these things to happen, and these companies are in our backyard. So we need to have some sort of say on how our land is being managed, and this goes back to the company. So I even pledge this to all African nations. You should also focus on the companies and how they're giving back to your people, because your politicians are not donating $2, $3, $5, $10, $50 million back to our community, but the companies will do this. So I think we need to focus on companies more and less in politicians.
Companies more, less on politicians. So that brings me to this question, just to follow up on what young Paris said. Professor, in the height of the diamond rush in Sierra Leone, the Sierra Leonean civil war, there was something called the Kimberley Process, you know, to certify diamonds, conflict-free. So when you go through the Kimberley Process, it was instituted as a way to check abuses in Sierra Leone. Do you think this could work? Should the world call for a sort of Kimberley Process for minerals that are processed in the Congo? And as young Paris rightly mentioned, what actions can be taken against these corporations and companies? Hello, Prof.
Yeah, I didn't quite get that.
Now, I did mention that in the past we've seen conflict diamonds in Sierra Leone in the height of their civil war. There was a process called the Kimberley Process that was instituted as a way of checking the exploitation of child laborers and child soldiers and conflict diamonds in Sierra Leone. Do you think we can use this sort of, do you think the world should adopt a sort of Kimberley process?
Yes, there should be a template, really. I think anything that works in one African nation must be exported because of the similarity in culture. When you look at the average Sierra Leonean, where does it dwell? Where did the movement start from? Is rural to urban. When you look at Congo, it's essentially the same thing. Never mind the fact that one is Anglophone and the other one is Francophone. No, the language you speak is superficial. The deep-rooted connectivity and the communal way of living dictates that whatever worked in Sierra Leone will work in Mali. Whatever works in Mali will work in Nigeria. Whatever works in Nigeria will work in Zimbabwe. So if we have found one formula that is able to help the locals stay out of poverty, because I cannot reconcile mineral rich, economically poor.
Yeah.
I mean, the two of them are impossible.
They call it the resource curse.
So we can very easily say what worked in Sierra Leone, bring it down to the Congo. And you see, there will be peace in Africa and the industry will also benefit. You see?
Now, just to follow up on what you said, Prof, talking about Africa, taking the template from one country and using it in Africa. Now, let's look at the African Union. They say charity begins at home. But in Africa, the African Union is, they say the way you lay your bed is the way you make it. We look at a case of an example, like Rwanda, neighbors to the DRC. I remember watching President Paul Kagame speak in Abuja last year, and he said, they went so low that they had no other option than to go up. And I mean, Rwanda was fixed by Rwandans. They decided that, look, we have to come together, and Rwanda is used as the yardstick for progress in Africa today. So what is the African Union doing about the conflict in the Congo, and why are other African, we're supposed to be our brothers' keepers, why do we have a sense of collective guilt? Why the silence amongst African leaders?
That you are Congolese, and I am Zimbabwean, and I am South African. They do not know that if I'm ill in the hospital today, you will donate blood and your blood will be able to save me. They do not have in their mentality that we are genetically similar to each other and therefore need to love one another. Because if you don't love your neighbor as you love yourself, you will focus on yourself. And then when your neighbor gets into real trouble, it will also affect you. Because if anything goes wrong in one African state, guess what? There's what is called the ripple effect. The refugees will spill across the border. There's ripple effect. So you cannot say that the division that we have in Africa, as far as countries are concerned, is artificial, very artificial. There are people today that are in Benin Republic and people in Nigeria that speak the same language. People in Niger, people in Cameroon speak the same culture, they are brothers. So don't you think geography is culture? Geography is very, very artificial. And it's geopolitical.
Thank you very much.
And the brothers and sisters will never change.
You're watching NC Debrief. We're talking to Young Paris and Professor Chris Mafidon about the situation in the Congo. Hashtag Congo is bleeding. Do stay with us. We'll be right back after this break. Back to NC Debrief, and we're discussing Congo is bleeding. I have with me a guest from New York, Young Paris, and in Lagos, Nigeria, Professor Chris Mafidon. Let's get back to a discussion. Young Paris, you called for a boycott of products allegedly made with unethically sourced cobalt. You've been specific about Apple products, especially the new iPhone 12. We're in a world where people can mobilize and speak with their money. We've seen that with various campaigns, and including the recent End SARS campaign. So do you think that's a route we can take? And you know, a lot of people we can't live without this gadgets. We're all, if permit me to use the word, slaves to technology. It would be very hard to function in a world without mobile phones and all of that. So how do you intend to, could you explain what you mean by boycotting products that are made with unethically sourced cobalt?
I think it's important that we move forward and revolutionize the planet as is. But I think right now, as we're addressing the issues in Congo, specifically around the violations within mining and how the business is unregulated, it's important that we also raise the conversation and we use our assets to do so. So I recognize that I'm an artist, I have a voice, and there's a new iPhone coming out, the iPhone 12. So that essentially that is just a target to focus on a company who's very much invested in companies who are illegally mining with these human rights violations, and bring awareness to them so that they can outsource and continue the conversation of what we are fighting against, which is, how we are reforming Africa. And again, 90% of issues in Congo stem back to mining. And the reason why I say, again, we should focus on companies, not politicians, because company CEOs are day-to-day people. They're everyday people. They have families. They're not politicians. Politicians are already designed to take beatings, to take, a sway of public opinion, positive. But businessmen understand a lot more responsibility when it comes to their buyer. And Africa is obviously a huge buyer in electronics, and 60% of our population is under 25, and most of us have phones, even more than computers. So I think to raise awareness and to put pressure on these companies to recognize, the follow-up of the conversation is, it's not only Apple, it's Samsung, it's Tesla, it's Microsoft. But as these communities speak on these issues, it raises awareness to essentially what the issues are back home in Congo. So it's obvious that we need our technology. But as this new iPhone comes out, I encourage specifically the African generation, but this is a call on to boycott the release of the iPhone 12 to show our solidarity with the issues that are happening in illegal mining in Congo.
Yeah, I appreciate that call to action with the iPhone 12. It could actually make a huge difference and, send shockwaves around the world. Now, Prof, we're moving towards alternative technology. We're moving towards a green world, a world that will reduce carbon footprints. Experts say they need new technologies to reduce the dependency on, fossil fuels and what have you that are destroying the planet and causing conflict like in the DRC. So this could mean a decrease in the need for cobalt and other resources in the Congo. Are these technologies developing fast? And this is a hypothetical question. So you take away the need for cobalt from the Congo, will the conflict stop in the next month or the next year?
We will, because our appetite for innovation and creativity is not going to stall. If you asked me 30 years ago about mobile phones, I would have told you, you're winding me up. But today, we have seen with Moore's Law, every single 18 months, the power of the microchip doubles, the size reduces, and therefore the price falls. That was Moore's Law, 1975. Now, there are right now quantum computing requiring a different type of hardware. So we cannot even tell where the direction is, where we are going. So you need to be more than a prophet or a seer to be able to look at the global demands, global needs, and global requirements. Because what they said initially was say, oh, we don't need more than 7 computers on the planet Earth. Today we have 7 billion computers. So this is what I'm saying, the dynamics of man's needs, man's consumption, and man's desire to have an easier life, a more comfortable life, to do things better, cannot be surpassed. So I will be short-sighted to start saying one mineral is condemned forever or the other mineral will be the next one. It depends on how innovation swings. From Silicon Valley to Texas, the oil well of Texas, nobody can specifically predict in what direction we are going to go because our development has never ever been linear. It's been zigzag. And that's why it takes much more than a scientist to tell us what tomorrow offers. It takes a prophet.
Thank you, Prof. Now, Young Paris, we have quite a number of, it's almost that some have described it as the Wild Wild West, competing interests. They say is Africa's first world war, conflicting interest in the DRC from Rwanda to Uganda and what have you. And then you have all these armed groups fighting themselves. Is the Congolese army and the joint efforts with MONUSCO, or does it have to do with the rules of engagement? Why can't they, because most of the violence happens in Eastern DRC. To put Congo in perspective, Congo is geographically as big as the whole of Western Europe for some of our viewers that might not have a clear picture of the situation there. What is the Congolese army well equipped? Do you think it's a military war that has to, how do you bring these armed groups to come to the table and say, you know, Congo is ours, is our country, we can't keep letting it bleed?
And as you mentioned, most conflict is in East Congo, and most mines, most of the mines are in East Congo as well. So we have to understand that, you know, why do people go to war? Why are there issues of battle? This doesn't just stem from an innate, you know, reason to just attack your brother. This has to come from a source of influence. And again, the influence is business. So when you look at how, you know, we understand how terrible Congolese government, African governments in a nutshell have managed their nations. But when you look at the business structure and how they're regulated, and obviously these rebel groups who are opposing to the Congolese government, you have this fight of, you know, those on the ground and those in government. So, and it's a never ending fight because it's around the mining industry. So what I push for and what I want to also reinforce is that sense of regulation in business where, you know, if I'm eating and my brother's eating, there's no reason for war. There would be no war in Congo if the business was stable, if the business was regulated. But you have so many foreign parties involved, whether it be China or the USA or Europe, with their own influence and their own, however loans have been addressed, or you know, how, you know, China will come and put a 100-year loan on a piece of land to do their work. So however these business acquisitions are being managed stem from the result of war. You see war when business is bad. It's not just, people don't just out there killing each other for the sake of, you know, of killing their own brother. It has to be outsourced from something, and I think that is a relationship between, again, the companies that are in the industries of Congo. And where there's conflict, you see there's also companies, and where there's conflict, you see there are also mines. So we really need to tackle the subject of the mining issues that are happening in Congo, and you'll find your answers of war.
A number of films and TV series have touched on the subject of the Congo, the business and the politics, as with most references of Africa, is usually marked with interesting connotations that somehow draws people away from the possibility that they have a sense of right and wrong. I'll quote from a character in the American series Suits. For context, she was being charged with bribery and the murder of her opposers, and she said, "It would be nice if the only thing found, if only we found oil under Texas ranchers or North Sea fishermen, but in the real world we find it in nasty places under nasty people, and any executive worth a damn does what's needed or goes out of business." Have a Hessington That's a quote from the Suits. And Young Paris did mention that it's still the business. It's the businessmen, you go after the business. So my question to you is, Young Paris, you've done a lot in pop culture. You know what music, film, and television can do to the culture? Do you think notions like this should be encouraged, and how can we use entertainment and pop culture to bring the story and the situation in the Congo to the forefront of conversations?
Yes, I do believe musicians have the biggest influence. You know, each nation is really known for their international kind of artistic implication in the world. You know, in Africa, we saw US for films, you know. When people, even throughout different nations within the continent, each country is kind of known for how they identify themselves artistically. And I think Congolese people have been known for our music. That's why it's a time now that Congolese musicians more than ever use their voice and speak out as much as they can. And I would encourage those, especially international, because it seems to be a domestic fear. I don't know if it's because, you know, back home, for those viewers who may be in the States, you know, in Africa, the politicians are more like the celebrities in many ways than the musicians. And people have a lot of fear when they think of the issues in politics, like maybe they're going to attack my family or my home. So in many ways, they'd rather stay quiet. But this is a time where we all have a device, we all have our phone, and there's no individual target. If we're all speaking on the same issues, this is addressed as a public and world perspective. And I think, you know, musicians, actors, whether you're a writer, whatever, journalist, this is a time now, specifically if you are African and there are issues in your country, to use your voice and your platform to let this message be heard. Especially in Congo, I would imagine that there would be so much more of an outcry, because we have, you know, when we speak of the issue of human rights, there's nothing comparable to what's been happening in Congo, even prior to these past 20 years. But again, to just reiterate your point, I think it's a time now to use your voice and your platform. And whether you're writing a song now and you're going to put that into your content, you know, I have 2 records that I'm actually writing to re-encourage the Free Congo and the Congo's Bleeding movement. But I do want to say this is a time of also gathering information. A lot of people didn't know of this, and even a lot of people who live on the ground in Congo were as aware of the dire issues, because it's also easy to live in your own box, in your own little world, if the issues don't address you personally. But it is a time to encourage the conversation, and eventually the conversation is inevitably going to have its response. And you will see musicians, you will see activism coming from different parts. We have 17 global protests that we've been organizing around the world for Free Congo, from Japan to London to the US. We have 7 protests alone happening in the US, where Congolese people are uniting and getting on the ground and pushing these issues to these companies in front of Apple, in front of Tesla, in front of Samsung, and addressing the world that there really is real issues with.
Apply pressure and amplify the conversation on the Congo. Gentlemen, we're almost out of time, but I would like to take a final word from Professor Chris Amafidon. You advise royalty, you've advised heads of state, you work in the proverbial corridors of powers. What lasting solutions do you think can lead to the end of the crisis in the Congo?
Youths have the final say. The younger generation are not going to tolerate what their parents do. The younger generations is a more enlightened generation. This is the information age. So the younger generation are going to mobilize other youths from other countries in the world, and they are going to lift their awareness so that there's going to be a global movement of the youths and the teenagers, and they will dictate things. The pressure is going to come from the grassroots, and the boardrooms and the cabinet rooms and the palaces will have to listen to them, because we have seen it in Tunisia, we've seen it in Egypt, we've seen it in Syria. The enlightened youths of the new generation are going to make sure that this post-George Floyd thinking. Where a man is killed in America and people
It affects-
protest in London, we go ahead.
The
So
whole
I
world is
have faith
connected.
in the youth.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I can't thank you enough for your time. We do appreciate your insight on the subject matter, and I hope and pray we see a Congo of our dreams during our lifetime. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you on the subject of Congo is bleeding. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking to Professor Chris Mafidon and Milandu Badila, popularly known as Young Paris. It's been an honor doing this. Join us next time on The Debrief. I'm Benga Aboroa.